Germany will hold federal elections on the 24th of September to decide which parties will enter the Bundestag, Germany's national parliament. Currently, the parliament is composed of 4 parties: Angela Merkel's centre-right Christian Democratic Union, the centre-left Social Democratic Party, the left-wing Greens Party, and the far-left Die Linke. However, everything could change this year because 2 other parties are expected to pass the 5% vote share required to enter the Bundestag: the Free Democrats and the far-right Alternative für Deutschland. After Election Day, negotiations between the parties will determine the makeup of the governing coalition, which must represent over 50% of the total vote. The current government is a grand coalition between the centre-right CDU and the centre-left SPD. Angela Merkel's CDU is currently the favourite to form a coalition, and her most likely partner will be the SPD again. But the Greens and the Free Democrats could also enter government, depending on the final vote. So what are the parties' views on European and foreign policy issues? The EU is often criticised for its democratic deficit. The SPD, the Greens, Die Linke and the FDP all call for the elected European Parliament to be given greater powers. But Merkel's CDU is less keen on the proposal, making it unlikely that the next German government will push for institutional reform at the European level. A Europe of different speeds has emerged as a potential solution to gridlock in the EU, by allowing groups of member states to pursue deeper integration independently of others. The SPD, Greens, and the FDP all support this idea. Merkel is also open to the idea, eyeing up closer cooperation with France. French President Emmanuel Macron has ambitious plans to reform the Eurozone by giving the bloc its own budget, finance minister, and monetary fund that can act as a lender in times of crisis. The SPD, CDU, Die Linke, and the Greens all support this proposal, but the FDP would rather see countries in crisis leave the Eurozone than be bailed out. The European Commission has proposed replacing the Dublin regulation with a system of refugee quotas that are meant to reduce the burden on southern European countries like Italy and Greece. Die Linke, the Greens, the SPD and the FDP all support this proposal, calling for greater solidarity among member states. Merkel has not officially endorsed this proposal, but there appears to be a degree of alignment among the parties on this issue. Frontex, Europe's border and coast guard agency, has been ill-equipped to deal with the migration crisis of recent years. The CDU, the SPD and the FDP call for the agency to be strengthened, but the Greens are concerned that would infringe on migrants' human rights, and Die Linke want to abolish the agency altogether. In March last year, the EU concluded a deal with Turkey to halt the flow of migrants into Europe. Now Die Linke wants to undo the deal, while the Greens call it problematic, and the FDP and SPD argue that it has allowed the EU to be blackmailed by Turkey. But the CDU and SPD are both in favour of striking similar deals with countries in North Africa. Donald Trump has called for Europe to contribute more funds to NATO, but only the FDP and CDU support an increase in defence spending. On the question of EU defence cooperation, all potential coalition partners are in favour of integrating EU military forces, while the SPD and FDP are in favour of creating a European army. Despite the authoritarian crackdown in Turkey, Germany has continued to back accession talks. But now the SPD, CDU and FDP have all come out in favour of ending the talks. This would amount to a major change in Germany's European neighbourhood policy and could potentially threaten the EU-Turkey refugee deal. Since the illegal annexation of Crimea in 2014, the EU has imposed sanctions on Russia. The SPD, the Greens and the CDU want to maintain this principled position, while Die Linke wants to end the confrontation with Russia, and the FDP has suggested that Germany might have to simply accept Russia's annexation. Assuming Merkel remains at the helm of the next German government, there is unlikely to be a revolution in German foreign policy. But with different views among her potential partners, the makeup of the governing coalition matters not just for Germany, but for Europe too.